I'm muted. Welcome to the call. We will start at 10 p.m. or 10 a.m.
Okay, it's 9:25, go. I hear it in real time.
Okay.
But you sounded better before. I don't know if you were speaking into a mic or something.
No, what I think is you didn't hear it yet. Welcome, everyone. We will be starting promptly at 10 a.m. So we'll talk to you then. Welcome, everyone. We will be starting in about 5 minutes. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Tools for Effective Distributed Teams webinar. I'm Jim Benson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Modus Institute, and we're here today to talk about, obviously, distributed teams. And just a little bit of housekeeping up front. The Google UI is nifty, but a little bit cumbersome. And if you go up to the top, you'll see your little head, and then next to your little head, there's another little icon, and then next to that, there's a grid of 9 dots. And if you click on that grid, you'll see that there are 2 choices up there, and one of them is Q&A. And so if you have any questions for me while we're going through this, just enter them in the Q&A area and I will answer them, and everything will be great. So this is a webinar format. It's fairly broadcast heavy, and for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a little more conversational than that, in real life. But this is the medium we have, so this is what we're going to do today. So let's just dive right in. First, a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, I have a background in psychology and urban planning, and you may want to put up there that I owned a software company as well. And in the process of doing all of those things, I became acutely aware and acutely interested in how people collaborate and how they do their work. And so how we get together as groups and really focus and get together and do like really good stuff. Several years ago, my colleague Tony Ann and I wrote a book called Personal Kanban. And since then, we've had kind of the good fortune of traveling the world, eating wonderful food, listening to and sometimes participating in good music. And like my personal reward for all of the travel that I do is not just helping people work better, but also being able to eat the wonderful food of our planet. And one of the things I dislike is thoughtless process. So run into a lot of companies, a lot of institutions where people are stuck not being able to do their work and desperately wanting to. So they desperately want to provide their companies and their teams value, but they can't because they're stuck in these horrible, thoughtless processes. And so we like to work to get rid of those and replace them with things that work a little bit better. My colleague, Tony Ann, hopefully many of you have met or familiar with. She's at Sprezzatura on Sprezzatura on Twitter. And she has a background in the fashion industry and public history. This means that she has kind of a mind that naturally questions the information that she's given, makes sure that things are correct, and that she's really good with things like supply chain and understanding where work comes from, and then the creative side of work and how to marry kind of creativity and action. She's also keenly interested in neuroscience and the future of work, and also joined me in our pursuit together of destroying thoughtless process. And so together, what we do as a company of 2, as a duo, is we help people calm their work overloads and actually be able to focus on communicating, completing work, and having good, resilient, awesome organizations. And we invented a few things along the way, like personal Kanban and lean coffee. So we're here today to talk about distributed teams, and that's our first class for Modus Institute. And the reason it's our first class is everywhere we went, when we talk about anything, people would say, how does that relate to distributed teams? How does better communication, how does visualizing your work, how does limiting your work in process, how do all these things that you talk about relate when people actually aren't sitting together? And more teams are distributed, and it's frustrating people. Now, the key here is that the problems with distributed teams aren't necessarily relegated to distributed teams. It's just exacerbated by the fact that we're not next to each other. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But at Modus Institute, what we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with simple solutions to very difficult, complex, sticky problems. And when we teach the class, we not only have videos that you watch, but we also have weekly lab hours where we actually have conversations. So you talk to Tony Ann and me and to John, who's our director of online education, but you also talk to your peers. So as you're going through the class and you're saying, okay, I want to implement some of these things, or I'm implementing other things, or I have these problems, we now have a forum or a collection of people who are going through the same experience, and we can all work together on solving those problems. So there's support as well as the classes. So the meaty part, starting into the meaty part here, is that work is all relationships. We get together in companies to work in the company of others. And often that frustrates us. So we get frustrated and say things like, I hate meetings. And the only reason that we're in a company, really, if you think about it, is to have meetings, is to be able to get together with other people and meet and create things of value. So it's not the meeting, it's not working with other people that's the problem. It's what's happening in between the meetings that's causing the meetings maybe to be set up in ways that are less conducive to actually creating something, or are just downright antagonistic. So Henry Winkler, the Fonz, who himself invented jumping the shark, said this, that assumptions were the termites of relationships. So when you and I get together and have a conversation and we try and make it short and sweet, that means that, sorry, I got derailed. When we get together and have conversations and you and I start to get into alignment, as we're working through our issues, if I give you, there. I'm sorry. I'm going to just back up and start that over again. I got distracted, which happens. So let's say that you're in a distributed team and you're actually having a meeting and somebody is somewhere else and you're talking to them and you think you're imparting information and they're only partially there. They're being distracted by something else. They're only going to be hearing part of what you do. And as they move forward and you guys think that you're in alignment and you go forward, you have assumptions and they have assumptions, and those assumptions start to drift. They go away from each other. And that starts to kill not only the relationships, but the work. And so what I believe is that work is basically 80% relationships and 20% all the other things that we talk about with our work. And so Deming said this quote, W. Edwards Deming, who's kind of like the father of lean, the father of the Toyota manufacturing process. He said, we are here to make another world. We are here to actually build things, build relationships, build companies, build processes that allow us to build a future. And if you and I go to work and we have a lousy time building a lousy product that we don't think is going to help anybody, we are going to go off and we're going to live that. We're going to live that feeling that everything is lousy. If we actually focus on our work and focus on good communications with each other, then something very different will happen. So when we're all working together as a group, we feel like we have cohesion. We feel like we're able to talk to each other at any given point in time. And that gives us a certain reassurance that somebody's always there. But we kind of fear what we can't see. We fear what we don't have immediate access to. And so when we distribute our teams, when we distribute our people, whether they're distributed by time or space, or whether it's everybody is in different locations, so we all have individuals in different locations, or we have one group in one city and one group in another city, or we have a group of 10 people and one remote worker, there are people and there are elements of those relationships that involve not being able to see each other, and things that we don't see, we tend to fear. So we have to raise the level of interaction, the level of discourse between people when they are distributed in order to maintain that cohesion. So collaboration is key. And I don't mean, the BS collaboration like these multicultural zombie pictures that we see all over the place, but I mean like real live communication, which is you have something that you desperately need to get done. You are with another group of people and immediately you need to do this, the other person needs to do that. We need to pull this kid out of this rubble. We don't need to have a meeting about it. We don't need to make a long plan about it. We actually have an immediacy of need. We have coherence of our roles. There's immediate feedback. If you grab the kid and try and pull him out and his leg's stuck, he's going to scream. There's purpose in the work, and then there's rapport amongst the people who are doing it. And so anybody who's listening to this broadcast who's ever actually been through a natural disaster, I can tell you, unfortunately, from firsthand experience, that these are the things that make people collaborate almost immediately. So neighbors who never spoke to each other after a major tornado, the next day they'll be out feeding each other, helping each other clean up the rubble, moving forward, because that's what happens when you actually have a coherent system. So we want to build coherent systems, and we want to avoid the common things that kill us. The first one of those is variation. So in knowledge work, there's a high degree of variation, which means that when we set out to do something and we have a certain expectation for that thing that we're about to do, and then it doesn't quite go that way, in general, that's variation. That's like the nickel tour of variation. And it happens all the time in knowledge work. And we need to understand what that variation is. And then when it's good variation, like the stuff that helps us invent new things, because invention is always based on some degree of variation, we want to exploit that variation. That's good stuff. We want to do a lot of that. But what we want to avoid is the variation of, I don't know how I get meeting invites from you. You know, you told me yesterday I was supposed to be in this meeting, but I can't tell if it was supposed to be in Slack or if it was an email or if I was going to get it via Skype or you're going to call me on the phone or maybe you told me personally. Million ways I can get that. So we want to lessen the variation of how we deal with each other so that we can exploit the other types of variation. We want to make sure that when people need information, they get it, because we can only act on information that we have. And professionals, especially knowledge workers, are in the business of acting on information. So how can we raise the level of information that's being transferred to the highest level it can possibly be, and make sure that that information is the right information to go? So we just don't want to overload people. We want to know what they need and get them what they need when they need it. We want to avoid multiple plausible stories. So I talked about a moment ago that when we, if we're in a meeting and we agree on something and then we leave and we start working in your city and my city, and then we don't talk for weeks on end, what ends up happening is I build more and more assumptions about what you're doing. You're building more and more assumptions about what I'm doing. And those assumptions for us are real. And so they build in our heads what's called a plausible story, but in our heads, it's just called the story. And then later, when somebody comes up and says, that's not what really happened, they actually have to convince me of that because my reality says something else. So the more that we allow these plausible stories to develop, the more we spend a lot of our time telling other people, no, that's not what really happened. So the closer we can work, the more we can see each other's work, the more we understand what's going on, the less time, the less energy, the less overhead we're spending coming back into what we often call alignment, right? Okay. And then the last thing is that the more that we have awareness of what's going on, what we're building, why we're building it, who's building it, what's going on, the more we have that awareness, the less we need to do planning. That doesn't mean we don't do planning. So I definitely don't want to go there. But what I don't want people to do is at the beginning say, over the next 6 months, this is exactly what's going to happen. And I have it in this big project plan, and I have it here in this Gantt chart, and I have it here in all of these other things. And any deviation will be met with resistance. That itself denies the fact that there is variation in our work. And that denial creates more overhead, creates more needs for conversations, because after a while you realize you're building the wrong thing, or you're building it in the wrong way, or different people aren't doing the right things because you're not actually doing the work that needs to be done. So we end up in this situation where we're on this road. It feels like a good road, but it's actually a road to hell. It's paved with good intentions. We go through planning, we get all the way through that planning phase, and then we just drop off the cliff of poor execution. And we would like to avoid that. And so the thing is, we all want to build something great. But when Tony Ann and I go out, we are all the time running into people who are just want to build anything. They just want to finish something because they've got 10, 15 projects going on at the same time. and they're completely befuddled. What do I do? How do I do it? And so we would like to fix that. We want to build a culture of continuous improvement. We want to build a culture that actually understands what's going on with their product in the market. They can adapt to change as it comes up, and it's comfortable. It's a comfortable adaptation. And that we're valuing all the people in the organization, valuing their creativity, valuing their input, and letting them actually be part of the journey that we're on. And then the last thing here is that all people want some degree of professional satisfaction. We go to work not just to get a paycheck. We go to work and we're still alive. And we would kind of like to, as one woman told Tony Ann in one of our client things, we would from time to time like to justify our existence. We would like to know that we've actually done good work at some point. So we want to actually be treated like professionals. We not only want a pat on the back or a pat on the head when we've actually completed something well, but we also want to have our opinions matter. We want to be able to engage in change personally. We want to be a real professional, to frankly, to earn the money that we're already being paid. And so how we get there is first we have to build an understanding of who we are and how we're working together. Understand, what are the mechanisms that we're communicating, what we're communicating, and then when. And then last, to understand, what we're being built, who actually the customer is. You wouldn't believe, well, some of you would, but you wouldn't believe how many times we go out and the companies that we're working with actually don't know what they're building or who they're building it for. They have a lot of plausible stories. So if you have a team of 8 people, you might have 8 different plausible stories about who the customer is and who it's being built for, but there's no agreement between them. And if there's no agreement in your team about what you're building or who you're building it for, then you don't know. You might personally think you know something, but you're not the team. You're not the company. The company has a collective intelligence, and that intelligence needs to also be aware of what's going on, and it needs to have some agreement. So maybe we should build something like that. So for a distributed team, we need the very things that I talked about, in the emergency response slide. So we need to understand what we're building. We need to be able to talk to each other quickly and to build things quickly and to react quickly when there's a change in the market. We need to have some sort of purpose for what we're building. We need to get rapid feedback. So there's lots of groups where rapid feedback is where rapid feedback is 2 weeks. That's too long. There's other groups where rapid feedback is months and months and months, and that's too long. Modern business needs rapid feedback, meaning as soon as that feedback is able to be consumed. We need to learn immediately when something is going off the rails, when something is going right. We need to know what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why. So let's talk about that. So the first bit is immediacy and the immediacy of feedback. Not too surprising. We do this most often with a Kanban. You can use other tools. So frankly, with us here at Modus, with Tony Ann and John and I, we have a Kanban, and that Kanban is also attached to a tool called Slack. And those two things provide us extremely rapid feedback about who's doing what state it's in, and what people need. So Slack is a chat tool, and I'll show a picture of that in a little bit. What we also do is we create things in our work in as small a batch as possible. And so one rule of thumb here is the larger the project, the larger the possibility of failure, and the more expensive or catastrophic those failures will be. So we would like to always try and figure out what's the smallest thing I can do to provide the highest value to the company, to my coworkers, to my customers. When we're doing that as a distributed team, that means that the stories that we have to learn, that we have to teach each other, are very, very small. So it's like, I would like you and I to get together over Skype and work on this thing for 2 hours. And when we're done, it should yield these results. Very easy, coherent story. Versus I have an 80-page design document And over the next 6 months, we're going to get together as a team and we're going to build these 500 things. So the smaller the batch, the more the coherence, the more immediacy, the feedback, but also more importantly is the faster you complete it. And when we complete something, we get kind of this serotonin burst in our heads. We feel good. Completion actually feels good psychologically. And when I see, either on the Kanban or by us actually completing it, that you have participated with me in the completion of a thing, then we build trust. And that is the most effective way to build trust in any organization. So you can go through all the trust building exercises in the world. Some of them will be pretty good, but permanent lasting trust comes from the demonstration of actually being comrades in creation, right? So we build, using the board, using the visual control, a real-time understanding of what's happening, and then we allow people to do their work. One of the interesting things about that is that then when they see things come up on the board, even if you're not in the same place, we can get together on a Google Hangout or in Skype or on any of the other myriad of tools that we have, and we can collaborate on something. And there's a lot written now on collective intelligence, and the short form of that is one mind plus one mind equals much more than two minds. So they create a system. The system is larger than the sum of its parts. The amount of creativity, the amount of information that you can co-process, the amount of options that you can think about multiply dramatically. So if we can find any way to healthily collaborate as a team, then we win. Okay. So the next bit here is coherence. So when we're building something, I talked about that small batch and it being a story. You know, is there a story that we understand? And can we see where that story came from? Do we understand what we're doing, how we're doing it, what a good outcome actually looks like? When you have a distributed team and people are remote and they're developing those plausible stories in their heads, that creates a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? And so when people are stuck in that FUD situation, they start to not only distrust, but they actually stop working because distrust is overhead. You have to sit there and think about how angry you are that something is happening or that you perceive something's happening. And the more that we can show people, look, things are actually going okay, then there's much less likely that they're going to fall into that kind of miasma, right? So we want the team itself to have purpose. Because when you have purpose, you have direction. So on June 3rd, 1980, I went to sleep under the stairs in my house. On June 4th, 1980, I woke up and my entire world was pink because it was covered by Owens Corning fiberglass insulation, because most of my friends' homes had been destroyed by a lot of tornadoes. I got on my bike and promptly rode to my friend Ken Reynolds' house, where I immediately started to help them recover from their loss, because about 3/4 of their house had been taken away. There was a lot of purpose there. There was no phones, had to ride back, get my dad, my brother. We went over there and helped them. And it wasn't like we had to fill out any plans or have any negotiations about how much we'd get paid. There was serious purpose. And we want that same level of clarity when we're working with people. So our purpose at that point wasn't how do we get the Reynolds' family back to where they were before the tornado. Our initial purpose was, what can we salvage from the house and what do we need to tear down because it's a hazard, right? So that was our small batch. They had a lot more to worry about in their quote unquote project, but our delivery of value was much more focused. So we understood what we were building. At any given point in time, we understood, I am carrying this box, I am pulling this wall down, I am doing this thing. I knew that when there was a large brick wall that was going to come down and I was a kid, I probably wasn't going to go help collaborate on that, but I was going to go help collaborate on other things. And we understood also that victory meant that they got as much of their stuff out of the house as possible and that no one got hurt in the process. So what we do with teams with this, even if they're distributed, is we will lay out a quadrant system just like this one on the screen. And we'll say, hey, okay, this is what we want. We want everybody to take either, if we're in the same room, post-it notes, or if we're online, virtual post-it notes. And you write down everything that you think about the vision. What's this supposed to do? Who is it helping? Why is it here? What are its goals? Everybody puts in things about the vision, and then you group those observations into like groups. It's called affinity mapping. And we affinity map what the vision is. So what we don't do is have a project manager or a team leader tell people what the vision is. We don't write it on a board and have people negotiate it. What we do is we ask everybody, what do you think it is? And without talking to each other, they tell you, and then you build a composite view. And what happens then is other people learn the real depth of this project versus just come up with some silly statement about what the vision is. In expectations, what we do is we say, this is what I'm expecting to do, and this is what I'm expecting from you. It's not a job description. It's how we're going to work. And then you look and you say, are there any holes? Are there things that we're missing? Is there a lot of overlap? Are there things that you would like to do that someone else can teach you? So we start to learn, okay, this is how we expect to work together as a group. And again, this isn't somebody coming in and saying, you're the this, you're the that, blah, 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 blah. This is the people on the team saying, this is what I think we should be doing, right? So you're building a shared story. You're building a shared reality. Boundaries are when we need to talk to each other. So I finish something, I work on something, I change something. I know when it's going to impact something that you care about. And so I need to tell you. So when do I cross the boundary where I can act, or when we have to act collaboratively? And then the last bit is the victory conditions. And the victory conditions are, as I said before, it's what happens if this is successful? And this thing then can become a living document. So every couple of weeks, you can come back and you can say, are these still our victory conditions? Joan left the project and was replaced. Is that new person going to change the expectations and the boundaries of the project? How have we as a group changed, and how are we as a group going to react to this? Not how does our textbook process say we should interact, but how as human beings are we actually going to interact? Okay, then we provide systems of feedback. So this is there's only 5 bullets here, so this is the 4th bullet. So when we get feedback, we can improve. The faster the feedback, the faster the improvement. The faster the feedback, the smaller the improvement. The faster the feedback, the cheaper the improvement. The faster the feedback, the more enjoyable the improvement. So as you might guess, I'm kind of a fan of really fast feedback. So this picture here is a picture of one of our Slack channels. And I'm somewhere else in the world, and John and Tony Ann are talking about how they're setting something up for an upcoming meeting. And what happens then is not only are they getting immediate feedback from each other while they're working, because Tony Ann's in Seattle and John's in Los Angeles, but even if I'm in Europe, at any given point in time, I can look on my phone or I can look on my computer and I can see what they're talking about. I can add something, and then I can go back to my regularly scheduled broadcast, right? So whatever I'm doing there. But we can still participate, we can still give each other feedback, and most importantly, we're aware and we care, right? So what would happen otherwise is I would leave for a week, I'd go to Belgium for a week, and then I'd come back, and then we'd have to have a 2-hour meeting where they got me caught up on status. Status updates are not awareness. Status updates aren't feedback. They're so lagging that all they are opportunities to blame, right? Somebody says, this happened, and I'm like, well, that's stupid. Why'd you do that? In real time, if I'm seeing it, that's not the conversation. It's this is happening, and then we all get together and come up with a solution. Okay. And the last bit here is rapport. So we talk a lot about trust, and trust is important. But trust is trust is not a root cause. Trust is a secondary metric. If you feel that you have trust that's broken down, your trust is not broken down because trust breaks down. because it just doesn't. Your trust is broken down because you're not communicating well, because there's external pressures on your team, because you have a deadline coming up that no one thinks that you can meet, because a new person has entered the team that doesn't behave in a way that the other people are expecting, because people don't have the information that they need at the time that they need it, because they're suspicious of the motivations of others. And so what happens then is that you're not actually looking for the root cause. And what we found overall, like I mentioned in the beginning, is the root cause of trust is that people don't see that the system is working. And working systems actually create product. So the more that you can see that the system is creating what it's supposed to with a minimum amount of pain, then you build trust. So maybe build something with a lot of pain is how you build initial trust. And then as you start to reduce that pain and build stuff so that it's actually, fairly enjoyable to build, then you build a lot more trust. And as you build that trust, you get something else, which we call rapport, and which I guess a lot of people would call rapport, because that's actually what it is. It's rapport. And rapport is, do I get along with you? So you can see here, John and Tony Ann are in Slack again, and they're having a conversation that has pretty much nothing to do with anything about making the company more money. But it actually has everything to do with the company making more money. So, they're talking about, kids and chicken pox and John's son and Oscar, and they are having what you might call a human moment, or a moment of rapport. And that means that now they have more empathy for each other. They have more camaraderie. And that those two things mean they're more likely to treat each other like human beings. So when a problem comes up, you're not, oh, you were another machine that failed on me and I'm going to blame you, or I'm not going to support you. But you are actually a human being. I'm going to pay attention to you. That they are building, the other things that are on the slide here, basically, that they understand who they are, why they work, and what the specifics of their lives are. And if you're in a distributed team, this is really important, because it's hard to figure out what time it is when you're somewhere else, no matter what. And so if I'm on the East Coast and I'm working, and John is on the West Coast and he's working, and I get to the middle, or at the end of my day, and I send him a simple request, and I just need him to fulfill that simple request so that I can go home. And I send it to him, and it's like 2:30 his time, 3:30 his time maybe, and he doesn't respond. And he doesn't respond, and he doesn't respond. I know what time it is. I know it's still within working hours. The legislated working hours is before 5, therefore you have to pay attention to me. And what I don't realize is that at 3:30, John has to go to daycare to pick up Oscar. Because without rapport, I don't care. The thing is, that's a real business thing. So I have to know if I want John to get something done, I need to ask him either before 2:30, or I need to wait another hour and ask him, when he gets home, because he's a real human being and Oscar's a real human being. And if I don't care about both those people, I'm not going to get my work done. So we want to make it a selfish motivation we can. But the nice thing is that once you build this, you actually are building a real system of work. So we've built a system here now where we understand what we're expecting from each other. We understand how and when we're communicating. We understand what work is happening, when it's happening, and how it's going. We understand who is having what problems and why. And we understand who they are as people. So as a little processing unit of knowledge work, whether we're co-located or whether we're distributed, we are becoming a little machine that produces whatever that thing is that our knowledge work machine is supposed to produce. And if we don't respect the people that are within that system, again, by treating them like professionals, giving them the information they need, and valuing the work they do and the people they are, if we can't do those things, then we will fail in building something of quality, because we will always be dealing with additional stress of the non-optimization of the human component of how we're working. So that, in a nutshell, is the 40-minute presentation. Oops. There we go. Of kind of the short form of how we deal with distributed teams. The calls that we have in our lab hours are phenomenal. They're extremely rewarding for Tony Ann and myself, and have been very, very well received by the students. So I myself was very frustrated with online learning because it wasn't personal. And so people thought that the reason that you went to learn something was simply to get the information that would have been in the slide deck. And that's what watching just a video is. It's just seeing a slide deck with some talking over it. But being able to actually interact, it enhances everybody. We all learn more because we create that collective intelligence bubble. So when we all get into a lab session on Google Hangout, and we've got somewhere between 5 and 10 people there, and we're having a conversation, the depth is stunning. I've just loved every minute of it. I've been talking about it nonstop since we started. So right now we put people through this thing in 6-week cohorts, and our next one starts on the 9th. I know that's right around the corner, so I'm sorry about the immediacy there. There's a webinar discount that is on the screen now, and it will be there obviously until the 9th, and that's when we're going to start the cohort. And I would love to see a bunch of people there, because again, I'd love to just have those conversations. In the near future, we're going to launch a few classes on personal Kanban, and then after that, we'll be inviting new instructors in, and we have some really awesome instructors lined up. So that back. That is the webinar in a nutshell. There is only one question now that I look at the questions, and that was from Tobias, which is there a Twitter hashtag from this talk? And the answer is no, there wasn't. And so next time we should probably do that. Does anybody else have any other questions that they want to enter into the Q&A? For those of you who came in late, if you go up to the top, you'll see your little head, and then 2 over from your little head, you'll see a box of 9 dots. And if you click on Q&A, you can open up the Q&A screen and ask all sorts of Qs. And I'll give a few seconds for that to happen. And sip some coffee. Okay, so there's one other question here about, what are the components that are covered in the class. The easiest way to see that is to actually go to modusinstitute.com and go to the end, to the bottom of the screen, and that actually shows how the class is laid out. One thing I should note about that is that once you take the class, you can always watch the videos. So there isn't really pressure for you to get in and watch things, over the 6 weeks. But the conversations are what's really important for the cohort. But the main things that are in there are to create initially a project charter or a team charter or whatever we would like to call it, which is that quadrant that I showed you. There's a second quadrant of 4, which is a communications plan, which I didn't show in here. And communications plan sounds really, serious. But the communications plan is actually just another 4-quadrant exercise about who you are, what you're communicating, and how you're going to communicate it, and what impediments are there. Then, how to build the Kanban, and then a lot of things in there about how to build rapport. Okay, and so Laura Stefan is asking, can you talk a little bit more about coherence and what that means? So yeah, I'd love to. I could talk about coherence for hours, so I'll try and do this very briefly. Right now, most of our work is actually fairly incoherent, which means it doesn't have a firm story around it. Why you're building it, why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, when it should be done, and what the value is going to be. And then most important probably is how you can measure the success of the thing when you've completed it. So those are the most important parts of coherence. But the main thing that I want to say about it is that when you and I get together to work, and we choose to do something, regardless of what it is, again, the larger that thing is, the less coherent it's going to be. So if you look at a movie, Movies are basically concatenations of extremely coherent mini stories. So if you ever notice, like when you watch a movie and it jumps from scene to scene to scene, and you've always got multiple characters, and you're always following multiple storylines, and then when you leave at the end of 90 minutes, you feel like you've seen a lot, but you've only been there for 90 minutes, and each of those storylines was less than 30 minutes, and somehow you left knowing a whole lot about probably a fairly large number of people, because the stories that were told in those mini storylines, not only were they, when the story was done, coherent, when they tied everything together at the end, that was coherent, but as you were learning it, you were actually exposed to little tiny coherent snippets, or perhaps intentionally incoherent snippets, that pulled you along through that story. And what we tend to do at work is some boss will show up and give you some work, and you don't know why you're doing it, and you don't particularly care. So therefore, you can't improve it, you can't do it better, because you don't understand what the context of the work is. And so coherence, that's like a short form of coherence. Tobias is asking also how to deal with serious time differences. So you have, well, let's say, for example, that you're Jim and Tony Ann and John, and you want to have a webinar. And when do you schedule that webinar? Because you have people who want to watch it in India, in Africa, in Europe, in South America, and in North America, and throughout Asia. How do you schedule that? And so, the short form for us is we're just going to do multiples of these. The time differences are going to drive a few things. One is serious time differences are going to require you to, from time to time, be inconvenienced and go to meetings when you don't want to. But the other thing that they're going to require is that you pay extra special attention to both the size of the tasks that you're giving to other people and the rate at which you receive feedback from them. That feedback is what is going to get you beyond the time difference. It's not going to be when do you schedule meetings, because it's always going to be inconvenient to schedule meetings when it's inconvenient to schedule meetings. By definition, that distribution of time zones is going to make it difficult to have meetings. So you want to make sure that you have done as many things as you can to get people the right information at the right time in a way that doesn't involve human contact. Now, there are other one of the conventions is that it helps to get your teams together, once a year or twice a year, so that they can just all see each other and know each other, in the flesh. That's extremely important. But as anybody who's worked with multiple organizations knows, that's not always practical. If you have a group of people, if you have 25 people in India and you are a 5-person shop, in California, you can't afford to fly those 25 people over, and you probably also can't afford to fly all of you over. So sometimes that doesn't work out, or sometimes you're working for a big company and they just don't care if you meet each other or not. So we have to come up with as many ways to make sure that the people in the organization feel cared for. And the way we feel professionally cared for is getting the information that we need when we need it, and building a coherent product with colleagues around the world. Years ago, when the internet first started, I recorded an album, and I recorded that album entirely with people that I'd never met. And I found musicians all over the world and managed to work with them. I think this was in 97 or 98. And we actually never met, and we did create a coherent album together by understanding that each of the small batches, which was like a little 3 to 5 minute long song, those things were coherent, and we were able to send them back and forth. Okay. So Caroline Cologne asks, how do you bring members of the distributed team who are not interested in creating these types of these types of working relationships, especially when you have a large team of like over 20 people. And that's a toughie. There's two things in there. One is having colleagues who may or may not be willing to participate in your little social experiment. But then the second thing is what happens when your team itself is not a small batch. So that's a toughie and requires a sip of coffee. So how I'd start to deal with that initially is to make sure that that you institute a system where the description of work is visual and in real time, and that I'm going to choose this word guardedly, that there is some penalty for not participating in that visual system. And the reason that I say that is because visualizing your work helps you because you see what you're doing and how much you're doing, and you don't overload yourself, and that's all good. But visualizing your work really helps the team. So that visualization is the grease by which distributed teams will run. So without that, you're running on a clunky engine. There's probably an underlying question there, which is this is also a team over which you have no control, right? So it's easy for me as either outside consultant or business owner to make statements about you make your team do this or you make your team do that, because I can actually do that. But there are other people on the call, like probably most of us, who don't have that luxury. And so at that point, there's a couple of things that you can do. So to institute change into a group that isn't ready to excitedly embrace that change. The first thing is what we call never let a good emergency go to waste. So we've had several times where we've been working with groups. They have been interested in doing the things that we're talking about, but they have no, they won't get anything by doing it, really. And so it's unproven. They're already really busy and they don't have time to really think about it. So along comes some emergency. And when that emergency shows up, all of a sudden you can say, hey, you know what? In order to get through this emergency really quickly, I recommend that we put up a quick 4 quadrants and we try to figure out what we want to do, who's going to do it, and what this is going to look like if it's successful. And then after that, we'll take the things that everybody's going to do and we'll put them in this Kanban, and nobody will leave this cool, sexy sounding war room until we're done. And so you build a war room and you put up all these artifacts, and people really get into it, and they get into it because they have the immediacy. There's an immediate need to solve a problem. There's not an immediate need to be an obstruction. And so as the role of immediacy dissipates, then the amount of resistance increases because people just don't feel the need to do what they perceive to be the extra work of basically of getting along. And so that's usually my recommendation about how to sneakily put work in or work change in. The other thing is process change. The other sneaky thing is just using the Kanban itself. We found the Kanban to be an incredibly viral, weapon for good, if you will. And so when people set up personal Kanbans and then they start bringing their personal Kanbans to meetings and they start saying things like, well, as you can see here, these things happened and I've got this stuff to do. Other people notice that and they're like, that kind of works. So maybe the change that you would like to see won't be immediate, but maybe you can start actually being the change you'd like to see. So kind of Gandhi it up and then allow that to move virally. And especially in Caroline's case, I would imagine that the people, actually I should say the people that I'm assuming you're working with now, given what you're doing now, would be a bit more creative and a bit more interested in improving things. I could be completely wrong about that. Okay, and so that's the end of our questions, and luckily also it's about the end of our time. On Twitter, I'm our founder, and please pop into that. Also, modusinstitute.com is there, and about halfway down the screen is a thing to sign up for the mailing list if you haven't already. If you want to find out more, because we're going to do webinars every month from now on, and they're going to be all varied, all different things that we're working on or thinking about. And other than that, I would like to thank you all for coming. This was a lot of fun from my side, and please send me feedback at jim@moduskooperandi.com. So that's it, and we'll see you next time. So thanks so much.